Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. As always, it's NMeade here. After so long, we are finally starting the Mario Kart Wii Time Trial Lab series. This series is solely dedicated to helping you all improve your time trials and getting better at the game. I am the former overall time trial world champion for Mario Kart Wii back in 2010 and 2011, and I have a good grasp for all tracks from grinding every track into the ground trying to reach number 1 status. With all that experience and knowledge I gathered along the way, I want to help all of you get better at any track you're having difficulties with, which is what the Time Trial Lab is all about. I thought it'd be fitting to have the first track of this series be on my best track in the game, which is Maple Treeway. Let's review how the format of these videos are going to go. From the original idea for this series to what this will actually be has evolved with some brainstorming. The ultimate goal I have with the series is to help as many individual players as possible. With that in mind, it requires a ton of time in a video format, as I like to really go much more in depth in a video format. As a result, the Mario Kart Wii Time Trial Lab series is going to be both a YouTube and live streamed series. There is going to be one Time Trial Lab video for all 32 tracks. I will cover viewer submitted times, anywhere from 3 to 5 times, depending on the track, and covering a spectrum of times for each track. We will watch back each submitted time and discuss the areas they specifically wanted help with. We'll take a deep dive and learn how to do most of the major parts of each track, specifically giving feedback along the way to each viewer submitted time. You will see the practical advice I will focus on for times at the beginner part of the spectrum to the more advanced times. The live stream portion of this series will accomplish the goal I have of volume of times to help as many players as possible. In a live stream format, I can do more condensed help to go through a large amount of ghosts with dedicated Mario Kart Wii Time Trial Lab streams. Definitely give my stream a follow, as I want to do at least one of these streams a month. Consider the YouTube video portion of this series as the landmark of advice and breakdown of the most common strategies and sticking points of each track, and the live stream portion a supplementary addition to have a higher likelihood of me viewing your time and giving tailored feedback for your time. In the following months, I'll be starting to upload more in-depth track tutorials, just like my first one on N64 Bowser's Castle that I did a few years ago. Those videos will be the true deep dive, frame by frame, full track tutorials to know every last little thing about the entire track and know how to play it better. My ultimate hope with these series is to have more accessible resources to all players of any skill level, from just entering the game for the first time, wanting to improve their skill, to the top tier players wanting to truly refine the smallest details to make the difference in their times. These videos are certainly a large undertaking, so leaving a like and subscribing would help a great deal. Thank you all for your support. I am very excited to finally get this series started. Let's begin on the Mario Kart Wii Time Trial Lab for Maple Treeway. So the first time we're reviewing today is a 222-434 submitted by Jay. And Jay had a couple of sections that he wants help with on the track. So he comments that he's really inconsistent overall on the track, but wants to focus on 4 main parts. Number 1 being the first turn after the cannon when entering the cannon on the right hand side. And he says he very often crashes into the wall or doesn't get the second main turbo at all afterward. Number 2 would be how to get low air into the treetop wiggler section with a wheelie. Number 3, the entrance into the U-turn on the boost panels before the turn and getting the alignment into the turn. And lastly, he's a bit unclear in how to do the last wheelie into the last tree branch before the last trick. So a lot of very common sticking points here on Maple Treeway, and I will help out for sure with all these inquiries here by Jay. So at least first off, the first thing you want to help with was the wheelie strategy, most notably like the faster wheelie strategy after the cannon. I would highly discourage this, especially in the 222 range, especially the task way of doing it, which he's kind of referring to, not until at least 216 territory. It's not even worth it at all. And even with doing no wheelie strategy at all here, you can still get 217s without doing that whatsoever. So I'll show you how to do that the proper way. Also, the entry onto the treetop can be a little bit confusing if you don't understand how the terrain actually works with different set bounces and things like that. So I'll of course review how to do that as well. And definitely the wheelie into the excuse me, the wheelie into the last tree branch before the last trick is also very daunting. Pretty much you have to just hard commit to a wheelie right when you land before you even hit the branch whatsoever. Because if you delay that wheelie, it becomes a lot harder. So that's one of the sections where you have to hard commit right away, or else you're going to end up failing it altogether. So this pace is a little bit awkward with the wigglers. I think at this exact pace, the wigglers will be just about moving. So yeah, so just see here, Jay barely made a pass on the right hand side. Pretty much from like mid to low 221 to like the mid 222 range is a very awkward spot with the wigglers on lap 3, because the wigglers are stationary there, and at some paces, like if you go to the left or the right, it's like barely starting to move and you can't make it either way. So very challenging, but let's go into the sections that Jay wanted help with right now. So let's start with Jay's first part Jay wanted help with. I would not go for the task wheelie strategy after the cannon until you're in almost 216 range. This strategy is infinitely difficult and it can be very inconsistent. Instead, until you're in at least mid to low 219 range, I'd go for this strategy instead. This is the old strategy used before any wheelie strategy after the cannon was used. This involves doing 2 main turbos after the cannon and simply wrapping the turn tightly with a drift, no wheelies involved. If we inspect closer at the scenery of the track, you notice that there are leaves everywhere. While visually appealing, yes, they serve a purpose for markers for different strategies. There are different colored leaves that are on either edge of the road for most parts of the track. Look at how these leaf outlines converge at one point entering the cannon on the left hand side. When you enter the cannon at this point, when you land, the same leaf pile is in the exact same line you entered in the cannon. You always want to land for this strategy anywhere in this leaf outline. If you land upwards to the left, the road is sloped and it's very hard to control to do this strategy. Land too far right, the road is sloping and is more bumpy towards the midline where both halves of the road meet, which makes this strategy near impossible, at least to do it optimally. After, nosedive cleanly as I do here, or land on your back wheel for preference. I immediately drift right to initiate a right facing drift and immediately pull back left to make sure I'm not drifting too tight. This keeps you almost going straight forward up the slope to give you enough space to do the drift and to the second main turbo properly. If you can tell, both sides of the road are sloping downwards to the midline of the road. It's important to not pass this at any point while doing this strategy. I personally don't use this marker I'm going to mention, but there are areas of light passing through that also land right in the midline of the road as a guide to make sure you aren't passing over this point. Eventually, the upward slope goes nearly flat, and this is when the first main turbo should be executed. After releasing the main turbo, I do not continually hold right after rechaining the drift. I slightly rock back the other way, which you can see on the input viewer was in the upright notch of the analog. As we progress along, you see I eventually go from a softer right drift to a maximal right drift. This is because if you go full hard right drift instantly, you're going to crash into the slope itself, which can sometimes send you backwards, but most often it just cancels your drift and you lose the next main turbo altogether. The trick to cutting as much around the slope turn as possible is turning hard right a bit later than you'd expect. Admittedly, this is pretty challenging to get right for a seemingly basic strategy chaining 2 drifts, but this is far more consistent to master and gain time versus going for the task strategy you were attempting in your runs, Jay. To end this strategy, notice I never turn back to the left at all, ensuring I take advantage of the physics of this oddly structured sloping turn and almost quote-unquote going inside the turn. Inspecting this closer, look at how close I get to the upwards green leaf pile layered on the darker terrain that's angled almost 90 degrees up. You must never hit this part with any strategy you do on this turn, as this road isn't road you can drift on and it will cancel your drift entirely. This happens if you take the wheelie strategies here too tight as well. Once I get over the main ridges and the slope, when I'm gliding back down the slope, I turn hard left purposely to align myself nicely into the following turn thereafter. This is how you do the strategy after the cannon, and as mentioned Jay, I recommend you master this strategy into at least mid 219 territory before entertaining any other wheelie strategy after the cannon. The consistency you'll gain in just this one spot when watching your run, you'll save at least 300 milliseconds if not more per lap versus what you were attempting before. This is a nice segue as Jay wanted help with entering the treetop, specifically with the wheelie. Again, I would not advise going for this strategy until you're really in lower 217 territory. Although doing a good wheelie strategy on the treetop is far faster by close to 200 milliseconds if done very well per lap, it is exceedingly difficult to master and is otherwise not worth going for where your time is at the moment. I will teach you the normal way of entering the treetop, which I recommend even into high 217 territory. It all starts with how you take the preceding turn into the treetop. Going through this slowly, we see there are different shades of the groove of this turning tree branch. Optimally, we are trying to nearly fall off here, but of course this is difficult to master. Taking this turn optimally, you see the very small and minute analog adjustments I'm doing on this turn. It may seem hard, but this can be reasonably mastered. Once you fall in mid-air from the tree hut, you can press the drift button and turn left, initiating a left-facing drift while in mid-air. You can see after starting the left-facing drift, I quickly turn right to make sure I'm not taking the turn too sharp too soon. Here is the easiest way to manage this. Only focus on this strip of the tree branch the entire way through. Once you pass over this strip of the tree branch in the first half of this turn, you're going to be sent far to the right if you don't handle it the right way, and you may lose a lot of time. I do the slightest analog taps to the left to make sure I'm just staying in line here. Nothing very complicated, despite how tricky the turn can be when learning it. Also notice how often I'm not even turning at all on the controller. The left drift was already initiated, so even if I go neutral, I'll remain in the left facing drift, letting the terrain of the track do the work for me, sending me around the turn. If you were turning sharp left the entire time, based on how this tree branch is, you'd fall off almost right away. And notice how I said you don't want to pass over this line in the first half of the turn. In the second half of this turn, you want to start turning right just as you're approaching the very end of the branch before it goes into the treetop. Ideally, you want to exit the branch at its tightest at this point right here, where these two lines meet. If you exit this branch too sharp way on the bottom, it's a lot harder to manage this strategy. The safest way to exit this, which I'd advise for you Jay to start learning this, is to exit at this strip of the branch, to the left of where these two lines meet up here. When you do that, it's a bit slower, but you won't be getting as many bounces when landing on the treetop. Almost always with this strategy, you specifically get 3 bounces on the treetop. Trying to release your main turbo before waiting for the last bounce almost always ends up in failure, with most of your main turbo boost being wasted and losing time. Sometimes you can get lucky and land with no bounces at all taking this exit tight, and you can release your main turbo a lot earlier. However, for consistency's sake, wait until the 3rd bounce ends, and this is when you can release your main turbo, as you're now at the flattest part of the treetop, whereas with the prior bounces, you're bouncing up the sloped part of the treetop, which makes releasing your main turbo earlier not feasible and will lose time. Align yourself into the right corner of this leaf pile, and the setup into the next turn will be perfect every single time. Next up, Jay wanted help with the entrance into the U-turn, getting on the boost panels before the turn, and the alignment into the turn. This is definitely the most challenging part of the track for most players, so I'm happy you asked about this part of the track. I'd advise an alternative method of the U-turn with where your current time stands until you're right around the high 219 mark before transitioning into the current strategy for the U-turn. However, I'm going to cover the current strategy for the U-turn later in the video as well for another player's time, which you can watch that too to know how to do it in the future. The success of the U-turn actually comes from how you do the drifts on the two huge boost panels before it. There is a certain rhythm and pattern I follow to get this down every time. First, you want to release your main turbo into the first boost panel after bypassing this section of the tree branch and waiting briefly. What this does is when you do a wheelie after, you're sent to the upper third of the top right of this boost panel over here. Notice how there are different lines in the boost panel and the two lines converge here. I specifically want to start hard drifting right at this last line into the upper right hand corner of the boost panel. After I'm past the boost panel, I reach the middle of the branch with the midline of the road shown here. Getting the actual main turbo is not important since you're at maximal speed in the boost panel, so don't worry about this main turbo not coming out sometimes. That drift serves as a setup for the second boost panel drift. As I cross this line, I instantly do a quick counter drift to the left and glide into the bottom left of the boost panel. You want to pass through this section of the top end of the boost panel for your setup into this version of the U-turn. I counter drift briefly to make sure I don't turn too far to the left as you're trying to enter the U-turn from this section of the tree branch at the end. Once you charge the main turbo, release it into a wheelie. Just before you land, while you're still in the air, press and hold the drift button and start turning right to be starting a right facing drift upon landing. You can counter steer left briefly as to make sure you don't turn right the whole way and potentially fall off in that corner of the U-turn. After that, it's smooth sailing from here. Hold right the entire way through until you pass the top zipper panel and you begin to see the tunnel straight away. Once you see this straightaway, counter steer left and hold out your main turbo until you've ensured a good angle into the straight, with this line being ideal for an alignment after this point. As mentioned, Jay, I would recommend you do this until you're right around the high 219 mark before dabbling with the faster U-turn strategy. The last area Jay wanted help with was another common part players struggle with, being the final wheelie into the last trick to end the lap. Higher consistency with the ending comes down to understanding how the terrain is laid out, which I'll explain now. If you notice, this tree branch scoops in from either side, and again, like many parts of this track, has a midline where these 2 points converge. The reason players can fly out to the right specifically here is they bypass this midline left to right, and since the right is sloped up, they almost always fly out of this tree branch. Angle too far to the left entering here, and you fly out on the left hand side. The trick is to remain on the left side of this midline at all times, but being as close to the middle as possible to avoid being thrown out to the left. To do this the fastest way, when you land from the last net trick you perform, you want to land being aligned with the middle of the left section of the tree branch. If you land far to the right or even further left, both scenarios are not salvageable most of the time. When you go into your wheelie, remember that you're in a trick boost, so turning in your wheelie does not lose time. I take advantage of the boost to turn in my wheelie to ensure I remain at least in the middle of the left hand side throughout the transition from the slow part to the flat part up top, noticing how I do adjustments as needed to maintain my line. One scenario I'll say as well that can happen is you can be at this part doing everything correct, but you end up being thrown to the right as you travel further towards the boost panel. That's because you slightly went to the right with your alignment. There's 4 angled sections for this path as noted here. You can tell faintly by the differences in the shadows of the texturing. Try and stay specifically in this section the entire way through. It will always be worth it losing a little bit of time wheelie turning before the boost panel to maintain this line as opposed to not and potentially flying out of the tree branch. If all goes well, you head into the last boost panel to perform the last trick to end your lap. Drifting tricks are more difficult than simply hopping onto this boost panel and tricking. I'd recommend you go for that J to build up your consistency currently. A slower but consistent way to ensure you don't fall out of the tree branch here is to not wheelie at all until you've made it up to the top part of this tree branch. This actually loses a considerable amount of time every lap, but it may be helpful just to get used to how the terrain works until you feel confident to try doing it with the wheelie. Also, a general piece of advice to anyone watching this is when you try and learn any newer strategy, which is a bit challenging compared to what you're used to doing, you just have to keep doing it over and over. Accept that you'll probably fail the new strategy you're practicing a lot, but realize it's a worthy time sink to eventually learn and master faster strategies, which will yield faster driving and new best times down the line. That covers everything Jay asked for with the feedback and tips provided for each section. Even if you only focus on one of these, Jay, the result would be a massive time cut for you. You have a lot of room for improvement here, so good luck on your improvements here in the future, and I hope this was helpful. Next in line, we have a 220-952 done by Tails, and there were two sections that Tails wanted help with. So the first one being after the cannon, and number 2 being the tunnel alignment after the U-turn. So just as I recommend with Jay, I would actually highly discourage even going for the wheelie strategy whatsoever after the cannon here on each laps until you're at least in 218 territory. You could still get 217s without doing any wheelie strategy whatsoever after the cannon. So I would highly recommend following just the normal double drifting strategy as opposed to doing a wheelie at any point there until you're in at least 218 territory, to where that benefit would be worthwhile. Because when you do a more consistent method like the double drifting method compared to the wheelie method, you can complete more laps and therefore get more practice in for the rest of the track. When you start adding in way more inconsistent strategies at the current skill level, you end up completing less laps overall and you're getting less practice in. So it's all being practical and efficient with the time that you spend on trying to improve your skills overall on this track or any track in the game. And also the alignment out of the U-turn is actually pretty underrated as well. So I can certainly help out with that. I actually go pretty in depth over, the different types of grains in the wood and the texturing and things like that. I can either throw you to the right or the left. So I can help out with that as well. And even, kind of reversing back to, I see with your treetop entries, definitely how I broke that down with Jay, you would definitely have some benefit with having a more consistent entry into the treetop. You can definitely save some time there as well. Absolutely. So I waited to say, Tails, with your pacing here right now, you can probably barely get by the left of the last wiggler on this lap with this pace here. Right when you're in the mid 220 range is when the wigglers don't become a problem anymore. Let's just see over here. Yeah, so the wiggler is just stopping, and this one is just about to move once more. Yeah, it was actually just barely starting to move almost off screen. So once you get a little bit faster here, those wigglers aren't a problem at all anymore for many, many more seconds faster. So you're almost there at this point. But yeah, if you just brush up on a couple of things, you could very easily, I don't see why you couldn't get a 218 or a low 219 very quickly with a couple of things we can help out here. So that is Tails time, and let's break a couple of things down right now. Just as I advised Jay previously, for you Tails, I'd also recommend not going for any variation of the wheelie strategy after the cannon until mid to low 219 range. I'd recommend learning the older strategy after the cannon that I helped explain previously. As far as the alignment for the hollow tree tunnel under the wigglers, I can certainly help with this. Understanding the terrain of the U-turn and the tunnel straightaway after will make things much easier to navigate. The road where the U-turn ends leading into the tunnel is a continuation of the same lines if you look at it a bit closely. It just narrows inward until you get to the bridge leading into the zipper trick out of the tunnel. With this, there are two lines that converge to a midpoint in the road, both for this ending U-turn area as well as the start of the straightaway below. It is crucial to never pass over this midline from left to right, as when you pass to the right side, you will lose a fair amount of time and will always need to re-wheelie and readjust. If you go too far to the left, which in your case you release your main turbo too early on laps 1 and 3 of your PB, you can do the wall ride strategy on the left, which at its optimum can be nearly as fast as a half chain wheelie and a normal exit into the straight. And doing this backup strategy isn't possible most of the time on the right side because the upwards walls are a bit more steep and it's harder to augment a drift to charge the main turbo here. Regardless, the goal should be having a perfect line every time as intended, which you did nicely in your lap 2. When you finish doing the U-turn, regardless of the method, you can hold the main turbo just before going airborne between both pieces of the road. By doing this, you can align to release and initiate your wheelie to the left of the dark line running down the middle over here. Aiming for this line in the road is a fair alignment marker. Being aligned like this too far to the left, and you will ride up the slope. What I would call the tightest alignment without failing would be to aim in between both of these lines over here, hopping down to show you what I mean. When you're in the wheelie going in between these grooves, you're aligned into the zipper without any needs for wheelie adjustments most of the time. Again, notice this midline here where both the right and the left downward sloping lines meet. If you are to the right of this line, you'll be sent to the right and need to realign, losing time. And this is the furthest to the left you can afford to be when landing down here without being sloped sharply to the left. It goes along this groove in between where the road on the left starts to get darker in color. Draw an imaginary line right over here and keep that in your mind whenever you're racing. In my 2:17.683 world record here, I purposely wheelie turned slightly 2 to 3 times because I would have otherwise drifted up to the left and lost my run. Knowing where this exact point slopes upward will save your runs if your alignment is right to a left angle. Being in this groove is most ideal for consistent results of having a clear shot into the zipper at the end of the tunnel without needing to wheelie turn at all. In summary, whenever you had a U-turn like you had on laps 1 and 3, you can afford to hold the main turbo a bit longer to align yourself properly into the tunnel, and it is still fast to do this. What's even faster is of course releasing this main turbo far earlier to be in a wheelie longer, like you did nicely on lap 2. Hopefully reviewing the terrain here and how it functions will help you master this section better. And third in line, we have a 2:19.611 done by Mendo, and Mendo also wanted to know how to do a good wheelie before the last ramp, which is what I covered earlier in this video, so I'll reference that for you over there, Mendo. And also overall, just for general driving tips to try and go faster overall with Mendo's time. So let's give a watch here. So definitely first off, I can certainly help with doing a better mushroom because you lost a lot of time there with how you're doing the mushroom there. You actually never want to pull hard back like that on your back wheel ever with the mushroom. Having all the unnecessary airtime lost a whole lot of time in that sequence over there. So let's continue to see here. So, okay, so definitely right off the bat, I would definitely recommend at this pace for you, Mendo, to definitely start learning how to do the faster U-turn strategy. It would be worthwhile at this point. I just in general, you know, from mid 219 to low 219 range, it's definitely a worthwhile time investment to learn how to do the U-turn properly there. And yeah, so again, you hold back on the back wheel doing the shroom there. Just improving your shrooms alone, you could probably get near a 218 already just watching this back in the first 2 laps. So let's keep on watching here for all the fellas here. If you're liking this so far, definitely give it a thumbs up. If you like that the time trial lab is finally here, let's go, let's go. Yeah, so you're losing so much time here going at like the biggest part of the boost panel. You know, it might be a thought, I can see the thought process where, okay, you want to hit more of the boost panel to be in a boost for longer, but you have to go so far wide to do that where it's only worthwhile hitting only a small portion of that first boost panel overall, which is what you'll do anyway when you try and do the better U-turn strategy in general. So just watching this right here, right now, you could definitely get a mid 218 without any issue, without too much effort, just brushing up on a couple of things here. So I'll definitely break down the first mushroom here. Let's see here. Yeah, so again, as I mentioned earlier with Tails' time, right from like mid 220 pace downward, the wigglers aren't a problem anymore. And Mendo's at mid 219 pace here, and the wigglers were just fine at Mendo's pace here. But yeah, overall, I would say everything is fairly solid. I would just recommend at this point for you, we can improve how to do the mushrooms and try to learn the faster U-turn strategy. So let's get into it right now. So, the mushroom for each lap. The mushroom on lap 1 and on laps 2 and 3 are a bit of a different approach, which I'll break down. What you'll find is you let the course do most of the work with the mushroom on any lap here. We're taking advantage of how the sloped angles into the grass into the shortcut are, where if done correctly, the mushroom wears off just as you're transitioning into the left curve. The mushroom timing is different for each lap, so let's focus on all things for lap 1 specifically. You want to wait until your entire rocket boost is worn out before using your mushroom. If you use your mushroom too early in your rocket boost, you will not make it past the grass. Use too late and you'll be more prone to going out of control into the fence or get a huge amount of unintended airtime from having much more mushroom boost than needed to get to the left curve. Just as the rocket boost is wearing off, I use my mushroom. At the same time, I am starting to turn left. If you notice, the road slopes into the shortcut, so staying in your wheelie allows you to start wrapping into the shortcut section. Just as you cross this exact line, I hop and turn even harder to the left at the same time. Done correctly, you'll take advantage of the road's terrain, landing on the end of the grass patch at a much more smoother area as the mushroom boost is wearing out, and optimally you go flat with no airtime into the following section. There can be slight variance of the angle you go into the left curve section, but overall this strategy is very consistent. At peak, I can get this exact mushroom at least 80% of all first lap attempts in a session. Another excellent variation of the mushroom is when you get a bounce on the grass from the remainder of your shroom boost and get a perfect bounce to land perfectly on the curved red leaf pile on the back wheel cleanly. Notice how I don't even hold down in any part of the sequence whatsoever. You're letting the track terrain, your speed, and the bounce you get do all the work for you. The mushroom here is not easy to learn in the beginning, but is completely doable with an outcome of having near perfect consistency with the mushroom on all laps. An easier method you can do is the 2008 method, where you cancel your wheelie just as the rocket boost ends, use your mushroom, and you hop at around the same time, doing the same inputs. The wheelie method is much preferred as it is faster overall. The mushroom for laps 2 and 3 are different than lap 1. You have a trick boost entering the lap and you're parallel to the sloped road on the right hand side. However, this makes it very easy being in this alignment every time. For laps 2 and 3, you want to be nearly hugging the sloped part of the road on the right with your trick boost. Right as your trick boost is wearing out, this is when you shroom. After your shroom, you start turning pretty hard to the right to ride the sloped road to throw you into the shortcut section. Once you're riding up the slope, it's smooth sailing from here. It is the same scenario as lap 1, where you try and hop right around this line into the shortcut section, holding hard left the entire time. The end result is your mushroom boost placing you nicely past the grass and into the left curve section. This shroom timing is perfect for laps 2 and 3. It's not too early where you don't have enough boost to make it through all of the grass, and not too late where it is too hard to control or ultimately fail it altogether. You can even compensate for this at a left to right angle if the last trick doesn't go well. Look at how after I shroom, I actually counter steer left briefly before turning right to hug up the slope. The counter steer left to start was done to make sure I don't ride up the slope too early from my poor alignment into the lap. This micro adjustment was simple and highly effective, making for a perfect mushroom execution. Once more, the easiest way to do this shortcut on any lap is by canceling your wheelie and still doing similar inputs at around the same area entering the grass patch shortcut section. However, doing this is at the cost of a lot of time, with the biggest time loss being in particular on laps 2 and 3 compared to lap 1. Just as you are doing Mendo, there is no purpose to hold down at all for this mushroom. That unfortunately lost a lot of time during your entire run watching things back. Thankfully, this is actually to your benefit, as when you learn the fastest way to take the shortcut, you'll save a large amount of time on each lap in your runs by modifying this one section alone, especially more on laps 2 and 3 where this saves the most. As you watched before, I broke down how to do the final wheelie into the last tree branch earlier in the video, so you may reference that section for assistance. At your current pace in the mid 219 range, this is the perfect time to start learning how to do the optimal U-turn on each lap. You'll save a huge amount of time per lap learning this. And to everyone watching, this is generally around the time I recommend learning the optimal U-turn on each lap. This is actually the main focus for advice that was requested on the last skills we will help with today. So let's watch that now. And lastly, we have a 218-662 done by Victor. And very simply, Victor is stuck on the U-turn itself and he doesn't know how or what way he should take it. So we can take a look here and see what we can do to help Victor here. So as well, I can tell right away just from watching the progression of these times, and you guys might tell too, with a couple of these suggestions of how I break the track down as well. You can see how just when certain parts get further and further refined, you can see how everything clicks from how I'm breaking everything down to having a time like Victor's here doing things a bit more polished. So let's just see here. Okay, so we can definitely help out with the U-turn there, absolutely. You have all the moving parts there already for sure with doing a great U-turn, just a very minor tweak and you're going to have perfect U-turns before you know it. Yeah, so overall, the driving here is very solid, very, very solid. That was almost a 45 lap one, even with everything going on there lap one, so that's very impressive. There's no reason why you can't get at least a mid to low 217 with fixing a couple of things here. So I think going for that older wheelie strategy is completely reasonable at this pace here. You can still do that even into like mid 216 range if you really wanted to, so I wouldn't change anything there. So let's see how the U-turn goes on lap 2. Let's see. Missed the main turbo. Okay, so that worked a little bit better. Oh no. Okay, so you went to the right of the midline with that maneuver there. So also another thing to notice here, a small detail that some of you may not notice, is Victor is actually trying to do a harder way of the U-turn, which is doing a wheelie into the boost panels into the U-turn. I highly discourage that overall, unless you're going for world record pretty much. It stays around, I think, 100 at best if it's done optimally, which I think Demon told me in the past, but it makes it so much harder and way more inconsistent. So I'll teach you a better, more consistent way to do it. But yeah, just watching this back right now, Victor, there's no reason why you can't have at least a mid 217 at this current time. Yeah, so yeah, that wheelie is messing you up so much right here. So I'm going to show a better way of the U-turn. It's probably the biggest sticking point for all players on this track is the U-turn. So the moment we've all been waiting for, let's get into it right now. Victor wanted advice on how to do the U-turn, with Victor saying he doesn't know how or what way he should take it. You already have a very good understanding and good foundation to work on and will be able to adapt to this quickly, Victor. The first half of this setup actually comes from how I described the other U-turn strategy for Jay earlier in this video, so let's review that real quick. First, you want to release your main turbo into the first boost panel after bypassing this section of the tree branch and waiting briefly. What this does is when you do a wheelie after, you're sent to the upper third of the top right of this boost panel over here. Notice how there are different lines in the boost panel and the two lines converge here. I specifically want to start hard drifting right at this last line into the upper right hand corner of the boost panel. After I'm past the boost panel, I reach the middle of the branch with the midline of the road shown here. Getting the actual main turbo is not important since you're at maximal speed in the boost panel boost, so don't worry about this main turbo not coming out sometimes. That drift serves as a setup for the second boost panel drift. As I cross this line, I instantly do a quick counter drift to the left and glide into the top left corner of this boost panel. I turn pretty hard left into this corner of the boost panel to try and build up my main turbo as quickly as I can. Shortly after passing the boost panel, I do a rocking back and forth motion that is completely rhythm based that achieves both completing the charge of the main turbo and how I release the main turbo to soar nicely onto the same section of the boost panel nearly every time. After counter steering right briefly, I turn hard left, specifically targeting where these two lines meet right over here. This is the apex of this tree branch. By releasing your main turbo on this point, or as close as possible, you'll travel longer in the air, affording you the time to land on this exact section of the boost panel upon landing. If you try and release your main turbo even a bit lower than this point, you either won't travel as far, or you can get very low air on some instances, at which point you're infinitely more prone to bounces and flat out bouncing over this boost panel, and sometimes bouncing over both of them, and that loses a lot of time. Your goal is to land at this section of the boost panel every single time. I release my main turbo and briefly countersteer hard to the right before going neutral on the analog stick, so I land specifically on this point every single time. Even slowing this down to explain all this in fine detail, what makes this a lot more difficult to execute is that this happens so fast. You're drifting on 2 boost panels, releasing a main turbo to land on another boost panel, then you go into a 4th boost panel, followed by a specifically coordinated right drift, and releasing your main turbo after that to get your alignment all in one shot. Don't underestimate how difficult this is to learn, but also understand that this can be mastered and pulled off with relative consistency if you give it enough time and practice. When landing on this first boost panel, notice how I'm not even turning. When the alignment is spot on, the boost does the rest, sending you into the right alignment to time this right facing drift off the zipper panel. Just as I'm passing the end of the second boost panel, I hop and drift right at the same time, aiming to land in this section of the zipper panel always. Based on how the U-turn is contorted with its terrain physics, by simply holding hard right the entire time at boost speed, you will take this turn tight consistently. Slight variations in the angle leading into this, timing of the hop, and drifting right can yield much tighter U-turns than this, which is most noticeable when you see your bike aggressively jolted to the right and being lunged through these different running sections of the road. Get familiar with this arc over here. Your exit main turbo into wheelie should always be in roughly this section here. Done properly, you're in perfect alignment to go on as usual with consistent perfect alignment through the tunnel every single time. Little bonus tip, you can always make micro adjustments in mid-air with nearly negligible time loss since you're airborne and not traveling on the road. What I notice you're trying to go for is the wheelie off the apex here. Don't go for this. Although this is the absolute fastest way to enter the U-turn section, which Demon normally does, and I think he said at its optimal performance, it can save around 100 milliseconds per lap. This is very difficult and makes things far more inconsistent, at least in my experience. You're much better off going for this way of the entry into the U-turn. There's almost no space to build up this main turbo in time to throw in the wheelie and properly align yourself on top of this. The reason why some of your U-turns went this way in your PB is because by doing that wheelie, your alignment and landing were too far to the left. So when you started your drift on the U-turn, you were nearly landing right on the normal road itself instead of the zipper itself, which made you ending the turn wider along with releasing the main turbo early, which is a very reasonable recovery when this type of U-turn happens as a backup strategy. Hopefully that in-depth explanation of doing the fast method of the U-turn was helpful and comparing it versus what you were doing in your Ghost and how it was affecting your U-turns in your runs. You most definitely have easy potential for a 217 here. Hopefully this helps you and you're able to improve your time from here, Victor. And that concludes the first time trial lab video, finally after all this time. It is my hope that all of you watching were able to take away at least one thing learned for this one on Maple Treeway. Moving forward, each time I am ready to make the next tracks video in the series, I'll be making a community YouTube post with a new submission form to submit your times for the series. I will announce the next track with simple instructions to submit your times. For the live streamed part of the series, I will have a separate submission form when my stream goes live, which will open the floor to submit times for any track. In the live stream format, I'll be able to do easily 10 to 20 or more ghosts in a stream, being able to do more swift breakdowns and general feedback and advice in a live stream format. As mentioned in the beginning, the live stream side of the series will be the supplementary aspect of being able to help a larger volume of people improve their own times, which is the ultimate goal of the series. A lot of time and effort goes into making these videos, especially these tutorial specific videos. Leaving me a like and subscribing to the channel would help me greatly, and I appreciate all of you for your continued support as always for so long now. I will see you all soon when we cover the next track in the Time Trial Lab series. Take care.